Hey guys, welcome back to the True North podcast. This podcast actually is our post-Frontier recap from our July Frontier. As many of you know, we have different people that are True North men come in and lead each Frontier. We really want them to come in and just share what God is sharing with them so that our guests come and they hear different things that are going on in the ministry. And this month, we actually had Lee Cantrell come in and share what God's been doing in his life and what he's been speaking to him. And I've got, obviously, Ryan is with us. Guys, man, excited to do this podcast with you.
Yeah. Very excited to kind of go back and look at what we experienced at the Frontier and kind of how we got there. So
Let's talk first about what had God been speaking to you? What was the subject that you wanted to dive into to share with the men?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, when we got together to talk about the ideas, I remember in that leadership conversation, you kind of threw out the idea of using a bunch of different movie clips. And so kind of almost an at the movies light, if you will, which is going on with Life Church. So a lot of guys in that particular camp, very familiar with that. But as I started moving in and praying about it and just, all right, what clips, what kind of things, God just really kind of started steering a completely different direction. And so, and the reason I was hesitant towards going in that direction, it actually pretty deep waters. Because if you've been to the retreats, base camp kind of helps orient people for where they're at in the story. And then at the ascent, we deal with listening prayer. And then this was moving a step deeper into how listening prayer can start to help the inner healing process. So I was a little timid, honestly, bringing that level of content to the Frontier with, knowing that some of the guys that show up to the Frontier, that's their first experience at True North. But I really just felt that was where we were supposed to go that evening. And looking back, I definitely feel as though God stirred and we got to witness some pretty wonderful stuff.
So let's tell them about what format we used and what content we went through.
So, every frontier is a little different. We've talked about this before. We're just stepping out in faith and trust that these things take shape. When we say we got together for that group to figure out what it is, a lot of prayer and discernment is to who's going to be presenting what the topic is. And there's a lot of freedom. We're not trying to make this into something. It makes it a little tough. Every now and again, people are like, oh, what is the frontier? And it's a thing. But it isn't a crazy, wild mess. It ends up being something that, we named it the Frontier, right on that edge of wilderness where we get to go and lean into some of those places. So as far as what we did on Monday, I really prayerfully considered, and over the last year, I have been plugged into the podcast from the it goes by the name The Place We Find Ourselves by Adam Young. He is a Christian counselor, and he really unpacks a lot of what it is to go back into your story and to go back and find those places that has pain, heartache, trauma, suffering, and honestly going back, facing those things, and really experiencing the grief that is involved. That a lot of times, I know all of us guys, we just want to say, hey, I've locked the door on that. I'm just going to keep on going. I'm not going to worry about that. And so that really became the focal point as I've been moving into that content, as God's been using this to honestly take me on a lot of journeys, going back to a lot of places in my story. I knew that's where I knew that was the subject matter for us on that Monday night.
Inner healing is one of the major streams. Actually, John Eldridge has a teaching on the 4 streams of Jesus' ministry while here on earth, and inner healing being one of those things. It's a pretty big deal. And I know that when it comes to kind of True North and inner healing, Lee, you're kind of you're our guy right now. And it's because you've been so passionate about it, and you've been taking several different people through it. And if someone were to come to me and I discerned that inner healing is where they would need to go, I would be setting them up with you. Can we rewind back to when you first started feeling or kind of diving into this particular type of ministry?
Yeah, looking back at the journey that God's been taking me on, it's a very fun ride.
Mm-hmm.
Dealing with a lot of not fun things,
Yeah.
but that's often the way that it works. And so, honestly, leaning in with the service that I've been engaged in with the Ascent really is the origin point. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the Ascent is really introducing guys to this conversational intimacy with God. And last time we all sat here a little over a year ago, that was the topic, is me sharing about the conversational intimacy with God. And so walking guys through really just the first taste of that sometimes sparks some pretty big memories as we start to ask God to speak in and make himself known. There are many, many times at the Ascent that in those group sessions, when we're talking with guys and we're inviting God to really speak in, God likes to dive deep. And to make himself known, he will go back to places that guys have been trying to keep locked away.
Yeah.
Really for two reasons. One, my experience is those are the places God absolutely makes himself known definitively. Like you may have said you don't want to go there, and certainly nobody else in the group of guys had too much knowledge of this or whatnot. And so God will press in to really reveal that he is he is here. And most importantly, as we'll kind of continue on this, to deal with it, to face those things, to actually come in and have his presence heal and bring comfort, resolution to those places.
Yeah, and by pressing in, by what you mean by God pressing in, can you give a little detail? Because I'm thinking of it's such tiny detail, right? That like only that person would have knowledge of. Like God would be the only one that would know that, but yet these other men in the circle might say something. Do you have any examples of that? Or
Yeah, and so the wildness, especially at the Ascent, all of us here have been to at least a handful, and can speak to those moments where, as we open the opportunity to just encourage guys to start listening and take the bravery of stepping out. You might see something in your imagination, and we've seen that where somebody will start describing. Well, I'll use an example that God shared with me. I'm sitting there praying for this group of guys, and I just had the imagined image of a giant oak tree, and I knew it was an oak tree. I could see acorns, I could see and whatnot, and so I thought it was odd that it would be that specific. And I just said, "All right, guys, I see this giant oak tree," and one of the guys in the group started getting really choked up. And the reason is that at the previous base camp, he had received the new name of Oak Tree. And I hadn't been at that base camp. I had no idea that that's what God was stirring. But that moment definitively helped connect the dots and affirmed for that particular individual that God was there speaking with us then.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. So let's dive in. So then dig into the inner healing aspect from leaving kind of the listening prayer. And
so, the Ascent really started on the path where we would have those lovely events of affirmations of the oak tree incidents or examples rather. But there have been multiple times where in those sessions, as guys start to open up and unpack, we find ourselves unpacking some pretty tough memories. They share some of the woundedness and broken. And again, the Ascent is after base camp. So we've already started talking about wounds that people have. And they open up and share a little bit about this. And leaning into this, I have felt God continue to push and nudge and guide with questions, direction, and guidance for how to tread very carefully in these very tender places. And so there have been multiple times where I'm sitting across from a guy and we get into a place where either their father left them with a deep wound, or their mother abandoned them, or a coach or whatnot.
Friends,
And
yeah.
so as I'm praying and helping guide these guys through it, I'm staying very connected to Jesus in listening prayer, actively saying, all right, God, what question do you have? Because I'm treading in these places of tremendous, profound tenderness. Where do I go? What do I say? And I'm partnering with Jesus as we say, can you tell me more
Yeah.
about what's going on? And that journey, working within the ascent, really opened the doors that listening prayer in connection with Jesus is an avenue and a pathway to profound healing and restoration. And in fact, that kind of takes us back to a year ago when, like you mentioned earlier, the 4 streams at Momentum,
Yeah.
you invited me to get up and talk a little bit more about this. So after a period of time of working with several guys, we're going to try to share this with the other volunteers of True North. And kind of like we did at Frontier this last Monday, I knew a really wonderful opportunity would be to have the guys that were involved in some of these stories get up. And the one that comes to mind right now, and we've talked with him, I know we have permission to share his story, but is of Nathan Zamudio.
Yeah.
And so we got up at Momentum and interviewed Nathan over what happened at an ascent. And that overall example, I mean, it's very near and dear, but it continued this process of affirming, okay, this is a place where God is moving us, not just me, but us as True North overall. And so the story with Nathan at the ascent that he attended, we got together, we were praying over with him, and if I recall, wasn't your father-in-law in that group?
He was, yeah. Yeah. And it was, he didn't have the experience that Nathan did, but for him being exposed to that for perhaps the first time, for him, it was just super eye opening. Like, this is possible. And I remember him coming home and talking about, he talked about that for weeks.
Yeah.
Like, it was pretty incredible for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, we're praying for Nathan. Nathan is sharing parts of his story, and honestly, we could spend probably a whole day unpacking Nathan's story. It honestly is absolutely miraculous that he is here with us. He survived a couple of suicide attempts, and there's a lot there. But in this, and again, back to that, Jesus, what are we're unpacking a lot here. We've got divorces, we've got suicide attempts, we've got post-traumatic from his active service. God, where are we going? What in the world are we here to address today? And through following the Holy Spirit, through following Jesus, listening, we are taken back, as Nathan describes, to a very core old wound that was from his mom. His mother abandoned his family at 3 years old. And as we start to center that this is where Jesus wants to take us. And again, a lot of that's right, Nathan, where are you? What's going on? Describe for me the feelings that you're experiencing. I start to see that as we're nearing this particular memory, Nathan is vibrating with rage. Like we are poking the beast, literally, figuratively, all of the above. And for those of you who don't know, again, I just described he's an Afghanistan war vet. I'm me. I'm not a big guy, and I'm getting kind of nervous because
I'm me.
Just
look at me.
Yeah, quite literally, Nathan is vibrating, and I know that if he snaps, it's not going to be good for anybody in this room. And I'm nervous. I am very concerned, but I still am very prayerfully pressing in as Jesus says, "Keep pushing." And honestly, my internal dialogue is, Jesus, are you sure you got me on this? Like what? I am nervous. I am concerned because we are pressing into very, very profound hurt and pain and I see his body exude this as he is vibrating with rage.
Yeah.
And I felt as the Father gave me the words to speak to Nathan that God wanted Nathan to give that pain to him. That God, the Father, was asking for Nathan to share it. And I remember telling him these words, that God's not going to take it from you. He recognizes your autonomy. He respects your choices. He wants to receive it. He wants to take that from you. But he's not going to grab it and yank it away.
Yeah.
You're going to have to let this go. And I just calmly continued to press into that. And I watched as Nathan's rage broke and tears streamed down his face. Now, a couple of things happened. And I got to backtrack just a little. Sorry for being a bad storyteller. But the interesting thing is, as a war veteran, he had suffered all sorts of trauma to his body, and his ears were suffering from tinnitus. Had a constant ringing in his ears, and he had shared that with us. In fact, there were several guys in that room that were also suffering from that. But I look at Nathan as tears are streaming down his face, and he starts to kind of do this number. I'm watching his face, and it's kind of odd. And then he says it out loud, and it will always be in my memory. But he says, "My ears are burning; they're really hot, and now I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything." Now he's streaming tears, and all of a sudden he's talking about not being able to hear anything. I'm kind of confused. I'm like, "All right, well, can you hear me? You say you can't hear anything. Can you hear me?" He's like, "Yes, I can hear you." And I understood. And so I said, "So your ears are better. Your ears are healed." And his eyes got really big, and he sat there and, yeah, I guess they are. And I shared with Nathan later, I've shared this with some of the other guys within True North, but in this experience, at that moment, as we confirmed that Nathan's ears were healed, I heard my Father affirm for me. I heard God sharing with me the ears were the easy part. And so sharing all of this interview style at Momentum, very similar to what we did with Damon on Monday night, really continued moving things forward. And preparing for that Momentum, I got connected with another source that has also been wonderfully mentoring to my heart and soul as I continue leaning into this, and that's hearing the sermons from Bridgetown Church in Portland. Tyler Staton. And a month before the Momentum, or I guess it was a couple months, it was February, he preached a sermon in a series, and the title of that sermon was I am the life. He's talking about the claims of Jesus. I am the bread. I am the life. And in that, he unpacks this thing of leaning into physical healing. We believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, that the New Testament, those gifts continue on, and to step into this experience of seeing people healed is amazing. But as I've been on this journey, as he's invited me and said, "Hey, you're a healer," and I am amazed at the spectacle of physical healing, and it is a complete affirmation of God's presence. But I love how Tyler articulated in that sermon, Lazarus was raised from the dead, but he died again. The man who had his ears healed, the blind who saw, the ears stopped working, the eyes stopped working, and the same's true for Nathan. His ears are healed right now. And they won't be unless Jesus returns. His ears will stop at the time, at some point, as the body decays. That doesn't change the fact that his heart shifted. Trauma from the past was given back to the Father, and he's now leading his family from a more healed heart. And that will have profound consequences. And so while the spectacle is wonderful, and I don't want to belittle it and whatnot, and so much of that, again, it was stated in that sermon, is followed up with, and your sins are healed.
Yeah.
Or your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
Sorry, your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
And I think that's what so much of this inner healing journey has continued to take shape, is that the wounds and the trauma of the past find restoration so that the future might get altered.
Yeah.
And that's what we saw again on this last Monday at the Frontier.
Yeah. Something I want to say too is like Tyler Staton does such a good job of explaining this, but there is no program for healing. That there's no system, there's no set of processes that you step into, or to be holy enough or righteous enough, all these things to do it. But at the same time, he just does such a good job of teaching how our posture is important, and how we can put ourselves in the best situation or right situation, because at the end of the day, it's completely up to our Father, and His timing and what He's going after, because He's going after, like you said, so much more than our physical body.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I just wanted to kind of interject that, as far as someone listening, that this might be a newer concept to them, of like, we're not going to sit here and give you the Healing for Dummies book, right? Like,
No.
Yeah.
like we're going to share that it's possible, and like lean into it. And that's kind of what we're diving in. And then
I think we have to know that God is in the business of healing.
yeah,
Oh my gosh.
But
Yeah.
so many times, what we think we need is not what we really need.
Right.
And so, like the guy at the pool of Bethesda, right? He's like, just get me to the pool.
Right.
That's what I need, right?
Yeah.
When really, Jesus was, right, unbeknownst to him, Jesus was
Right.
the one he needed right in front of him.
Yep.
Right.
You know, and he's like, well, just get up. Well, he thought the water
Right.
is what he needed to accomplish.
Yeah.
Right.
What he thought he needed. And so I think often when we're praying for healing, specifically physical healing and those things, and even emotional healing, sometimes that doesn't get answered.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're speaking to, is like, there is no formula, and we don't always know what God's up to.
Right.
But we do know that He's a good Father, and that He is ultimately after the healing of our heart.
Right.
And so if your physical healing is not what is required in order to also heal your heart, then perhaps you won't have physical healing. But Jesus is after us being whole,
Right.
this side of heaven. And so I think about Nathan's story in particular, and I think that, and I've experienced this myself, is that so often something very tangible needs to happen,
Right.
because I have such a short memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, perhaps he needed that physical healing of his ears,
Yeah.
Right.
to remember what was happening
Right.
in his heart.
Right.
And so just to make it that more real, and kind of stick with him. So
I'm sure Nathan's listening. Should we just dive into what else he needs to do, and what
Yeah.
else needs to be
Yeah,
healed?
whatever.
Should we dive
Yeah,
into that right now?
absolutely.
Remote inner healing.
Yeah.
he,
We love you, Nathan.
So
he wouldn't mind.
I got a question for you, and I hope this doesn't take us off track, or maybe even fast forward to where you were maybe wanting to go. But it kind of stood out to me a little earlier as you're talking. So at base camp, we discover our wounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we step into sonship, and we find freedom. But there is a difference in identifying the wounds we have and breaking the agreements at the fire, and finding freedom, and actually doing inner healing work where
Right.
we're going into the depth of the situation with Jesus. And could you do, I think I want you to say this on behalf of the men that have gone to base camp, discovered the wounds, but what we're kind of maybe trying to promote is like, hey, there might be more there.
Well, and yes, and I'll
There's always more.
Yeah.
I'll kind of take two different approaches, and one is, how many times have we seen guys come to a base camp the second, third time and burn those same agreements?
Yep.
And what that to me shows is I saw it,
Yep.
but we didn't really address it.
Yeah.
We didn't go in to fix it. And so one of the things that we kind of started the Frontier off with was that C.S. Lewis quote about the dentists, that so many of the times we want to go to God for comfort.
Yeah.
But I'm not willing to face the true life-altering consequences of God getting in and resetting and addressing and facing those things.
Share that quote, or to the best of your memory, or do you have it with you?
I don't have it. I will reference it's from Mere Christianity, but the short version, I'm gonna bungle this a little bit. But Lewis just says, I didn't want to go to my mom when I had a toothache because I knew that the moment I asked her to give me something to deaden the pain I was experiencing, she would do it, but then she'd schedule an appointment with the dentist.
Yep.
And that meant that I was going to go sit in the dentist chair. And if you give the dentist just an ounce, an opportunity, they're going to go all out and they're going to start messing with teeth that weren't hurting at the moment in time. And I can tell you, having been to a base camp over a decade ago, and base camps and ascents and all of this stuff, it leads me kind of to the second point, and that's how many times have I sat there and said, yay, I got healing for this thing and I'm good now. Not quite yet, because it's the next piece.
Yeah.
It's the next thing. And as I look at my story, I shared this at the last time I jumped on the podcast with you guys. My identity, there was a core piece of my identity that God addressed back in those early days. And since then it's been, and that applies to this. And as you guys were talking about this, that there's not a formula. One of the things God convicted of me as I'm doing this assessment, as I'm going back into these stories of my own past, I realized I had an agreement that God was healing others in spite of me. Mm-hmm. I was reading my journal last night. God is healing people in spite of me. And God just really got a hold of me again and said, you are my beloved.
Was that before you got the name Healer?
With you. That was the start. I think moving past that, then he started to affirm with the name, because I mentioned it the 3 different times that he came and affirmed. I shared the 2 on the podcast last time, and then I actually shared the 3rd one at the Frontier on Monday night, where he just came and said, I gave you your name that means healer from your generational lineage 4 generations before you were ever on the scene. Yeah. And so he had a plan for me. Yeah. And so it's not in spite of me. Yeah. But that subtlety of, I identified it, and I'm still tripped up by pieces of my story that want to grab hold and drag me back in that direction.
I think it's difficult sometimes too, like, especially like going to base camp first couple of times, you do get a lot of these things identified. Like, you get a better understanding of yourself and why you feel certain ways or why you've experienced certain things. But too often, I think we stop right there. We feel better because we've identified it and we understand it a little bit better. But understanding it's not the same thing as healing.
Right.
And sometimes, like, there's no formula to being delivered by God or healed like in a moment by God. But there is kind of a process to being healed and walking through healing. And that's really what kind of Monday night was more about.
Yeah. So can I ask, and this is coming from the critic, right? Like, I think I know my answer to this question, or I have confidence and faith that I do. But for the critic asking, why dig into this? Like, it's gonna hurt, and right now I'm okay. Like, I'm making it through. Mm-hmm. Why? Like, and I'm even thinking from the guy that maybe just had the mountaintop experience at base camp, and they're doing good. Like, they're doing better than they've ever been before. Right. They feel stronger. But now we're sitting here saying, you got to dive into that stuff. Yeah. Why?
So, listening to Adam Young share is he's really he does this professionally with his clients and moving forward. And he shared a quote from Richard Rohr, and that just simply says that if we don't transform our pain, we're going to transmit it. And I can, beyond a shadow of a doubt, look at my life and say those unhealed places in me have turned into shards of horribly painful experiences for my wife, my children, my friends, as my unhealed broken places have cut them to ribbons. And so, and I challenge you, let me know how many guys have you seen come through this? How many times is it your own experience that you lash out, you say something awful to one of your kids because you're just upset and you realize, oh,
I've never done that.
Okay, good. Well, then,
Not this week at least. Wait. Oh, never mind.
It's Tuesday, man.
Yeah, it's Tuesday. Tuesday. That's a couple days. That's a long time.
Yeah. But I found that to be 100% true. You guys?
Well, yeah, I mean, how many times have we heard people say, like, I didn't want to be like my dad, and they're so focused on not behaving the same way or reacting in the same way with any given situation, and then they find themselves doing that very thing.
Yeah. Or the complete opposite. And so then there's the
overcompensating.
Then there's void of good character building for their kids that's not there.
Right.
Yeah. If you overcorrected over your own power,
because that's what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
If you say no to it, you're choosing your own power. Because I think the obvious invitation for all of us, like Jesus is always going to invite us into that place.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about the you pattern?
So yes, again, with the content that we shared with everybody at the Frontier on Monday, I was very thankful. I actually just quickly shot an email because the video that we used was from a conference that Adam was a part of, and most of the time his podcasts are just audio, but this clip he gave us permission to use, and I'm very thankful for that. And it just talks about the U diagram, which was developed by Kathy Lorzell from the Allender Center.
Yeah.
And it describes the fact that the Christian experience is contained within those 3 days of death on Friday, burial on Saturday, and resurrection on Sunday. And most of the time, especially in the church, within Christian circles, the idea is that you had pain, it's in the past, and we're just going to go straight to resurrection and celebrate the fact that new life wins all. And that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that wasn't true for Jesus. Jesus died on Friday. He was brutalized, murdered, hung on a cross, and he died. And then on Saturday, grief, mourning, things aren't okay. We go back into these places of experiencing what it is to grieve the death of sin.
Yeah.
That sin enters in and has wrecked all of creation and is present in all of us, and grieving that, realizing that it may not be okay, because that was the experience for the disciples on Saturday. They didn't know resurrection was on Sunday.
Yeah.
We know it now.
They had a faint idea of it, but they just saw the reality of who they thought was their Savior just get brutally murdered.
And descending to the depths of Saturday, the Saturday experience. And only then can true restoration of the resurrection come and life be brought to defeat the trauma of Friday. And as that content was introduced to me, as I continued to look at that and listen through varying episodes of Adam's podcast, it's just true. And it's profoundly important. Like we said, there's not a formula, but there's a process. And I love what they say. If it was true for Jesus, it's true for us. And I have found that to be incredibly true. And so we shared that content. And then we had the opportunity of walking through a story with Damon over a time that he and I unpacked a memory. And it happened to be another Ascent thing, but this one's a little different in the fact that Damon and I are both serving. We're on the prayer team at the Ascent trying to lead guys. And I get the sense that Damon is disrupted. He's a good friend of mine. I kind of know when he's acting a fool. to say it, and not profoundly, but I know that something was bothering him. And I pulled him to the side. I said, "Hey, buddy, something's up. What's going on?" And Damon, and thankfully, received that well and paused. And I said, "Should we pray? Is this something that we lean into now, or do we need to say, hey, God, let's put a Band-Aid on it and figure this thing out after the retreat?"
Yeah.
And we both felt very strongly that we were going to take some time. It was moving towards the free time on the first day for us that, all right, now we know what we're going to do. So we moved over, we sat down, and I just started asking him the questions. All right, Jesus, what is this? Where are we? What's going on? What is stirring in Damon's heart? And we went back. Damon started to receive and started to share these memories of a time in his family that there was a lot going on. His sister had been in an automobile accident. She was a year younger than him. She was 16. He was 17. And this is about a week after the car accident. He's at home. And during that time, his grandfather went to the hospital. And so his mom came home to grab some supplies, and Damon is trying to get information from his mom, what's going on with my sister, what's going on with granddad, these kind of things. And his mom is just in a daze and doesn't pay him any attention. And Damon erupts with rage. And we're at this time, he's describing these things, and I'm asking, okay, what's going on? Tell me, how are you feeling? What is it? Getting into the memory, having Damon lean into and experience what this is. And as Damon's describing this, he shares that he's actually current age looking, kind of seeing this playing out in front of him. And I remember being invited to press for Damon. Hey, Damon, what does that 17-year-old feel? What is he experiencing? And he said he's just very, very upset, very mad. Mom won't talk to him. And I remember I felt nudged to say it, and I said, all right, you go talk to him. And Damon kind of popped up, like, I don't want to talk to that guy. I want nothing to do with that guy.
He's embarrassed of how he was acting. And
oh, okay. Yeah. So there's a part of you want nothing to do with. Oh, okay. Okay, these are clues. These are the pieces of all right, where are we moving in this story? And so he shared something then that he hadn't really shared, that his rage erupted so much that he made some threats. And he had never really been honest with anybody about these particular threats. And then he was dishonest about them, but then bringing everything back. So the story kind of starts to move along after and away from this memory. And again, I'm being prayerful, and I feel like, no, we're going to bring this back. We're not leaving. We're not done here. So we're going to come back. I know there's some things that happened after, and people had some conversations with you and whatnot, but no, we're still right here. We're in the living room. What's going on? And Damon sat with a younger version of himself, and in this particular instance, Damon's experience is Jesus stepped in and loved this younger version of him. And then as this continued to progress and the questions allowed things to unpack, God actually brought an image of his mother for him to experience. And as Damon shared with us that night, it was just this little old frail woman that had nothing to offer. Yeah. And an adult Damon in that room and was able to see and understand that, for him it's his sister and it's his grandfather, but for his mom it's her daughter and her dad, and she's got nothing. And so he received this overwhelming sense of compassion, whereas a younger, immature place of Damon is just enraged that he and his needs are not being tended to by his mother.
Yeah.
But he's walked through this process of receiving Christ's compassion for his mom and loving his mother in that moment and releasing, being able to release that anger and that rage that he felt towards his mom for not having his needs tended to. And then he turned back, and it was now the invitation to, all right, let's try it again. What is it for you to talk with the younger version of you? And as he progressed through this, that same sense of compassion was extended to that place of himself and brought that back for restoration, of not being embarrassed of a 17-year-old with a very understandable desire for answers over what's going on in his family. And yes, he spiraled and took it too far, but you don't have to hate yourself over that.
Yeah.
And he had been.
Yeah.
And for him to have compassion for himself in that moment was beautiful. And it was very interesting because as we prepared for the frontier, as I was figuring out, okay, God, what is it that you want us to share? I very definitively knew that was the memory. And I shared there at the frontier that Damon and I have actually done this a couple times. He's in my men's group, and there have been a few occasions in which God has stirred this, and we've done this collaboratively together. And as I was thinking which memory, this one sat there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't doubt God, but I was like, okay, sure, whatever. And I didn't think too much of it. But then, God being the beautiful, mercurial, playful God that he is, connected a dot there at the frontier that I hadn't even really realized was going to be brought together. And so there was a series of events in Damon's household that led to him needing to have a conversation with a young man. And I had to pause, and I asked, I was like, Damon, can we go in and talk about this thing? And he said, yeah. And what transpired was the realization that healing occurred to prepare him to have a conversation with a young man with compassion. Yep. And it just so happened that young man was another 17-year-old boy that Damon leaned into that, starting that before he opened his mouth with this young man by saying, Jesus, how do you see this young man?
Yeah.
And it was funny to hear it. And we're so sad that Damon is unfortunately on vacation and can't share this for himself. Yeah. But he's like, I didn't want to have compassion.
Yeah.
And kind of what spurred that too is as we landed on this, so all of this kind of that doubt, that element of, is this valid? Is this just, whatever? Is this warm, fuzzy feel goods, whatnot? And it does go back to this, like, you'll know it by its fruit. Yeah. Like, I just hold on to this thing, like, is it producing good fruit? And so as we conclude the story of compassion for a younger version of himself and compassion on his mom, we ask the question, is there fruit from this?
Yeah.
And that's what led us into this place with the realization that this event of talking with this young man came shortly after our trip to the Ascent. Mm-hmm. And God went in and set things in motion that Damon's heart would find restoration, that he gets to now be the compassionate Jesus that he saw meeting with 17-year-old him.
Yeah.
Loving the 17-year-old kid. And Damon stepped into those shoes with a healed, restored heart. Mm-hmm.
And so he transmitted compassion instead of transmitting hurt, healing, shame, trauma.
Yeah. And so that opened the doors, and they have a great relationship right now to the point that he joined Damon at base camp this February. And I look at that story and I see that going into these places, and there's a big piece of this that I'm going to land on right here. We talked about it earlier, in the presence of others. Because Damon was disrupted at the Ascent. His friend, saw this and said, hey, buddy, like, what do we need to do? We paused, and he said, there's something for us to tackle. It wasn't, there's something for me to tackle. And he went off and spent some time quietly with a journal and a cup of coffee or whatever and said, all right, God, show me everything. He was too close to that. Yep. He was too close to the memory. As I'm listening and receiving, as God is directing the questions and helping me understand where we take this, the witness that helps see, oh, Damon, there's a part of you that you just don't want anything to do with. And I didn't know, but I was there for my friend. And so that was what the Frontier was all about, was bringing this level of content that, it's pretty deep waters.
Yeah.
But I knew Jesus wanted us to share this for the guys of True North and really for anybody. But inner healing is available. And so much of the work that we do at Base Camp does have some solitude. And then we understand that one of the key things we say at the Ascent as we're getting people plugged into hearing from the Father is it's a whole lot easier to hear for other people than it is for yourself.
Yeah.
And that piece applies so profoundly to this work of healing those broken places. And so if you go into those places alone, it's not that healing can't happen, but we were actually made to be doing this in community. Again, before sin entered the world, there was one thing that statedly wasn't good, that God said, nah, this wasn't perfect. And it was that we were alone.
Got him being alone.
That wasn't good.
I think thinking about myself and doing this and like how beautiful it is that we do need community, but especially in the West here, like we're taught to ignore our emotions.
Yeah.
And so like this process is not necessarily complex. It's a simple process, but it's difficult, right? And so much of the story with you and Damon is just, and how did you feel about that? And how did you feel about that? Because we don't always articulate, and just going through the process of unpacking, like, how did I feel about that? You know, because so many times, like when I go in, God brings something up to receive deeper healing. It's like, there's a couple things that happened. Like I just immediately ignored it and kept on trucking, right? Like, yeah, that sucks. We got things to do, and you keep on moving, right? And you don't really address it. But the problem with that is it's a wound that festers, and then it pops up some other place in your life, and that's where you act out of, you know, your woundedness or whatever. But then the other thing is that I just lost my train of thought. The other thing I was going to say.
As you're unpacking.
Come on, we're live on air, bro. You got to get it back together.
Man. I know. Get it together. Just acknowledging your feelings, but just the prompt of making someone think about, like, how did I feel about that? You know? And there's always, like, you can read a book,
right,
and you can get all these tips and tricks, compensatory strategies on how to move on, or, you know, and there's so much comfort in just understanding, oh, that's why I am the way I am.
Right.
And you can stop there and move on. But then again, it's like that festering wound or the beach ball underwater that will just pop up somewhere else in your life. But there cannot be complete healing without inviting Jesus into that place.
Right. Right.
And so, and he changes your perspective on it. Like with Damon, like he saw himself in that place as if he would have never seen himself that way.
Right.
Because it's so much different from a 17-year-old boy to a grown man.
Well, and this is the key piece of this too. Damon didn't know he saw himself that way.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
he's acting off, and something has stirred. Something is going on in his emotions, whatnot, that he wasn't acting himself. And I couldn't ask him, Damon, is this connected to a wound in your past? Can we get there? No, like that direct approach will fail every time.
Yeah.
In that place, it was moving in the direction, trusting Jesus to go into these places, and really going into these places. The questions involve, Damon, where are you at? Oh, you're in your living room. Tell me about your living room. What is it? Because as we move into the actual memory, you can tell a quick cursory story.
Yeah.
And the content from Adam that we brought up articulated this. If somebody tells you a story that, in Damon's case, well, I was at home, my mom came in, I got mad at her, I smashed the vase. In fact, I had heard that story. I knew of this story,
Yeah.
but I didn't know that it went even further, that he made threats. And moreover, I didn't know that that left him feeling ashamed of himself. And it took us going into that story to reach down and face the emotions that were buried. And that's the key piece of this U diagram. Those places are left buried and unattended.
Yeah.
And just like if we bandage a wound improperly and we don't change the dressing, it festers and rots. And that's what we're left with.
Yeah.
So we've gone over the what and the why. So let's talk about how. And not in the sense of like teaching how we go into, but in the sense of like people listening to this that are stirred, that they have an action step to take after this. I believe each person does.
Yeah.
I hope if you're listening to this, that you're starting to think, okay, like I need to take a step in this direction. What would you say to that person?
Honestly, start with prayer. I hope you're at a place where you have made that connection, that you have conversational intimacy with God. Because for me, that's definitively the first step. Before I started leading guys at the Ascent and moving into this, it was the epiphany. And I talked a lot about that last time I was on here. And so really making sure that you have the ability to listen to the voice of God, because then you're able to pause and ask the really tough question, God, where do you want us to go? And in that, there are multiple different things. And so as you're pressing in and learning of the fact that parts of your story need tending to, God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are so loving that they will move in the places and help direct you in the ways to heal that. So in my own story, there are times where he's brought a nugget, I'm aware of something, and then there's a pin in it. And that pin sits there for a little bit as God sets things in motion for another guy in my life to come along and we unpack this together. Or that, all right, now this is a pin that I really need to go facing counseling. And that has been a part. And so some of this does need professional counseling because some of these stories and wounds need to be tended to with the utmost care and grace. And if you go into these places unprepared, it's not terribly dissimilar to deciding to just throw a backpack with a couple of granola bars in your bag and go hike out into Alaska. There's a recipe for disaster, and that would be one of those. So doing it with care. The phrasing that Adam used bringing up is, you're moving into those places where angels fear to tread, and that is the woundedness of human spirit. So for me, moving into this, it was mentorship, hearing from Tyler Staton as he's talking about these things from the sermons and just listening to these amazing stories. A profound, beautiful series was just concluded where they went through the book of Ruth. And in it, one of those sermons is titled The Psychology and Theology of Suffering. And it is profound. That whole series over Ruth, I would encourage, would be a great starting point for anybody. And then the other piece is, like we said, don't do it alone. Again, back to the Alaska example, your survival odds of going out all by yourself, not great. You have somebody with you, they go up substantially, and making sure you find the wise people to guide you through that. And so it might be that you're to share some of these parts of your story with your group, your men's group or whatever group that you're in. But again, that's why I go back to the prayer. Pray, because again, there's a wonderful verse about pearls before swine. We don't put these very, very precious pieces of ourself before people that don't deserve it. Yeah. And so again, conversational intimacy with God of, God, you brought this to my attention. John tells us that great thing, ask the next question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so who do I share this with?
Yeah.
What do you have for me to do? How am I to move about this? Because I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, God is all about restoration.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. There's many men's group leaders out there that are absolutely doing it for the right reasons. They have their heart in it, but they have yet to discover the conversational intimacy with the Father. Mm-hmm. And so for those of you, you might be in a great group of guys. It's great community. Where I'm not telling you to not leave or to leave that and find something else. But as far as sharing this type of stuff, that's the discernment you're talking about with, like, you share some of this stuff in the wrong environment and not even they'll say anything wrong. They might not have anything to say. And then that just pours on like it's an unhealable place within inside of you because
you will be re-traumatized.
No one can help you. And so I want to we'll point out a couple True North resources for this. First of all, we could tag all this stuff into this video or podcast, all the resources. But I think an easier thing to do, because this is what we're going to do continually each month, is within our True North app. I don't know that we've ever talked about the True North app on the podcast, but we do have an app. Yeah. Look it up. It's True North. It has our logo. It's a red box. Look it up.
I think I know where you're going. So we could add the link to that.
Yeah. Let's add the link. Let's do that. So, Taylor, our tech guy back here, he's going to add the link to our app in this podcast. So in that, at the very bottom of the page, it has a link to the Frontier, and I believe it might even, it just says Frontier.
It says Frontier. It has a little fire icon.
Yeah, and it's at the very bottom in the center. And you'll click that, and each month we are going to put the resources for the Frontier, and we're going to keep them posted in there. So there will be, July of 2024 will be in there for the years to come, so that people can go back. We'll even post a link actually to this podcast in there, and each month we will do that. But Lee had graciously and put his time into listing out what he believes are good resources. So that's an Adam Young podcast, a Bridgetown series.
Couple of books from
and
John.
A couple of books from John Eldridge. And so those will all be in there. And then another thing is reach out to us. If you're like, I don't even know where to start with counseling, or I'd love to have a mentor or just a wise guide to walk through with this. If we don't have someone that fits, I tell you what, we are going to try our hardest to make that connection happen for you guys. And the truth is we actually do already have a lot of connections that we can get you in with. And so reach out, because we've got a lot of counselors that we trust that we can get you in touch with. We've got a lot of guides. And the cool thing is with True North is, I think that one of our big hearts of sharing this podcast, even not only to help you become whole, but to call others into this ministry of inner healing, because Oklahoma City needs this. Your town, wherever you are, it needs people stepping in to be the wise guides and to help men through their stories so that they can become whole. Because we're talking about the importance of community, but if there's not the men to even reach that are guiding other men, we're all just kind of out in the frontier figuring it out on our own whenever there's paths that have been blazed for us. Right. Let's blaze more.
And yeah, so that was the heart behind sharing this content on Monday, or the Monday of the Frontier, was for some of the guys, this is going to be a complete introduction to a topic. Maybe they've been to the Ascent. Maybe they didn't realize that Jesus truly desires to go back to these broken places. Maybe we've been operating with this idea that, nope, I'm just going to keep on trucking and make it. Oh wait, we're invited. Jesus wants to go back. So it could be that this was a brand new idea. I also know that there are a handful of guys that are in various volunteer positions within True North that Okay, yeah, I've seen a little, I've done a little, and I know that we're moving forward to disciple others to be the guides and the stewards, because that's been the progression of True North. Again, it goes with our mission statement, creating environments where men can hear from God. Well, that includes going back to the really gnarly places that we don't want to and that we often avoid. God's there and wants to speak to us too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good, man. It's so awesome. I think Ryan and I have been front row seats of your calling, Lee, and it's been such an honor. And you always twist your little Jedi mind tricks on us, and like, so James, how did that make you feel? I'm tired of it, but it's okay. I accept and love you anyways. But no, it's an honor.
I think I've hurt his feelings a few times. He's like, I'm like, nope,
not going there. Not going there today.
Yeah.
It is a Tuesday afternoon, Lee. We are not doing this.
Like, Ryan, you've got such a big heart, buddy. Come on. No.
It's for another day.
You're such a blessing, though, to True North, man. I mean, the way you love people and the way you love us, it's fun. It's so fun that we're all still relatively young. We're going to get to do this for a while.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, you know what? One other resource too, because I don't want to leave it out, is reach out to your people in ministry about this as well. Like your local pastors, like they care about this as well.
Yeah.
So if you've got a trusted one of those, sit with them. But
yes,
I think that leaves our audience with a lot of good stuff to take home. So download the True North app. It'll help out a lot.
Yeah, check out those resources.
Yeah. So thank you guys for joining us, and thank you guys.